Welcome on this drizzly, almost winter Michigan Sabbath afternoon. I want to welcome you to this fifth presentation of the 2019-2020 series of Michiana Adventist Forum programs. The title of today's presentation, The Voices of Parents of LGBT plus Children, Their Journey and Process. Before we get started, let's stand and David Waller will lead us in an opening prayer.
Our heads. Gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you this afternoon thanking you for your blessings. We thank you for the opportunity we have of coming together and hearing and discussing and thinking. We pray this afternoon that your Holy Spirit will be with us in a special way as we look at an area of great concern to many of us and to an area that's sensitive. We just pray that your Holy Spirit will guide and lead in everything that is done and said this afternoon. In Jesus' name, amen.
Before we get going, I'd like to bring your attention to the remaining three forum programs of this year's series. On February 22, Claudia Allen will be our speaker. We don't have her exact presentation title yet, but it will be in line with Andrews University's Black History Month theme. February 22, and I want to alert you, this is a change in the date we've been advertising. Forget February 29, mark February 22 on your calendars for that one. And the theme for that month here at Andrews will be Origins, Chronicling Our Journey. March 28, Taurus Montgomery will be presenting his topic titled Sports and the Church, Why the Next LeBron James Can Come from Adventism. We expect all the 13 and 14-year-old boys here for that one. April 18, John McLarty. He's a pastor of the Green Lake Seattle Church, and for many years was the editor of Adventist Today. And his presentation title, A Far Branch on the Adventist Tree, The Evolution of a Liberal Adventist Pastor. Some reminders. At the back of the room, on either side, we have sign-up sheets. If you give us your name and email address, we will keep you informed of Michiana Adventist Forum's happenings. If you have signed up and you didn't get the notice of today's program, Debbie Robertson says it's because your writing wasn't good enough. Or you have changed your email address. So if you're not hearing from us and you gave it to us, please give it to us. Please try again. And this time be legible. We have a website, and you can go to that website if you miss a program, and you can read abstracts of our programs. On the older programs, we have audio up on the programs, and on the more recent ones, audio and video. So if you miss it, you can go to our website, michianaadventistforum.org. We're also on social media, facebook.com/Michiana Adventist Forum. I want to take a few seconds to thank our faithful supporters. End of 2019, you were generous. If you keep being that generous, we will continue to bring you provocative speakers on fascinating topics. Thank you. I also want to thank the individuals who keep Michiana Adventist Forum going. Alyssa Williams, Kathy Cadell, Terry Fivesh-Calkins, Art and Debbie Robertson, Bruce Zimmerman, John Ney, Jim Hayward, Jim Harris, and Jeff Boyd. Okay, today is, as is obvious from the four people sitting at our table, we have a panel of four speakers, all of them faculty here at Andrews University. They will be reporting the findings of the groundbreaking study of SDA parents of LGBT plus children who have come up to them, a study commissioned by the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. I'll introduce Dr. Sedlacek, who will then introduce the rest of the panel members. Dr. David Sedlacek is a professor of family ministry and discipleship at the SDA Theological Seminary here at Andrews University. He has a doctorate in social work from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Dr. Sedlacek is or has been a clinician, researcher, teacher, pastor, administrator, and with his wife Beverly, author of the book Cleansing the Sanctuary of the Heart, Tools for Emotional Healing. He was the principal investigator of an earlier study of Adventist LGBT plus millennials, and now also this latest study of their parents. That's the topic of today's presentation. He co-facilitates a care group for LGBT plus students here on the Andrews campus. David, introduce your panel for us.
Thank you so much. I have a real privilege of introducing my colleagues, Dr. Shannon Tricarton. Shannon is a very special person. She's in the social work department, teaching as a professor there, and she helps with our research. She is the data expert behind, let me just put this over here, slide on two things, but Shannon's the one who does the in-depth data analysis for us on our studies, and deeply appreciate her doing that. And she also is my co-partner, my co-facilitator with the Haven Care Group on campus. Kurt Vanderwall probably is one of the ones, Dr. Kurt Vanderwall is one of the ones, he's a chair of the social work department, but has been a long time advocate for this population and really leads us to think about this population from a social justice perspective, that kind of lens, because he has such a heart for people and a heart for our LGBT students. Another one who does is Dr. Nancy Carbonell. Nancy is in the psychology counseling area here at Andrews University, and if there are any of us who have put blood, sweat, and tears into work with our LGBT students, it's Nancy. She has facilitated a group for almost 10 years, if not 10 years now, the All for One group. And we're really grateful because it's on her shoulders that our group stands. Our group, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later, but our group is the official Andrews University approved sponsored group. And Nancy is the one who's been pioneering that made this even possible. So you can see the people who are here and the value that they bring to our conversation today. I think it's me. I'm going to move this. I think that's better. Yes. All right. There it is. Now we're back. Yep. Thank you so much, Kathy. I did. Okay, so we wanted to title this presentation "The Voices of parents of LGBT children. What do they have to say about themselves? And what is their journey with their children? What is their process? What do they go through when a child of theirs reveals to them that they are gay? And so that was the focus of this study. And so, as was mentioned, it was commissioned and funded by the NAD, the Sexuality Committee of the North American Division. And for me, that tells us something. That tells us that the North American Division is interested in not just having people talk to them, but putting their money where their mouth is. That this is a subject that is important to us, that they were willing to fund, and to me that says a lot, because there are a lot of denominations, as we've looked at this, who are not that understanding or supportive in terms of putting money behind this kind of study. In fact, this is the first study that I'm aware of any denomination that has studied its own parents. Just as our first study of LGBT millennials was the first study of any denomination, or by any denomination, of its own LGBT children. So really the Adventist Church, we're groundbreaking, as was said in this study. So the team members are those who are here, as well as Renee Drum, who has been a longtime advocate, who is from Southern Mississippi State University. And so this is a mixed method design study. In other words, we did quantitative segment of the study, and we had 160 parents who completed, who began the survey, and 118 who actually finished the survey. And so we, in the quantitative survey, embedded spaces for questions, and some of that data you're going to be hearing today. But we also did focus groups with them. We did, well, not focus groups, we did in-depth interviews with 21 parents of LGBT children, where we had an interview guide and we asked them questions. And again, Renee and Nancy and I were those who helped collect that part. And Kurt and Shannon really were key and are still key in helping us analyze the quantitative data. So to qualify for the study, parents needed to be following the religious doctrines of the church for at least 1 year prior to their child coming out, and be the parent of an LGBT plus child who was between the ages of 18 and 35. And we chose that age range because that was the age range of our original study. And it was our goal to try and get as parents who were as close to the same sample as their children were, so we could try and compare the two of them. And so another qualification is that they experienced their child coming out not more than 10 years prior to the interview. So, and again, I think there were some respondents who were perhaps a little outside of those parameters, but those were the ones that we had set for people to respond. So the interviews range from 1.5 to 3 hours in length. They were all conducted face-to-face, either by Skype or in person, and were all digitally recorded. And the recordings were then transcribed verbatim in line with qualitative study standards. The transcribed data were then coded and themes were identified according to the research questions the parents were responding to. The data were processed using in vivo, a software program used to code text-based research information. And then the participants, again, we tried to solicit participants from the same sources as the millennial study, and so we got participants from SDA Kinship. They were very, very supportive of spreading news about this study to parents who were affiliated with them. And also parents of LGBT students and university support groups. We asked our own students if you would, ask your parents to fill this out, and we try to do that in other universities as well. And then SDA bloggers and allies, were kind enough to circulate this to people in their sphere of influence. Adventist Today advertised the study. Spectrum Magazine, we let them know we were doing it, and they did a great job of circulating it. We got a lot of response via Spectrum Magazine. And then social media snowball sampling, where people who knew other people were asked to share it with them. We attempted to get some other friends of ours to complete the study as well. Our friends from Coming Out Ministries, we asked them if they would be kind enough to send it to their respondents, but they chose to decline because of philosophical differences. So this is what we have so far, and now we're going to pass it on to Shannon.
Still can't? Yeah, you can hear me now. So let me tell you a little bit about the parents who did complete our survey. As you can see on this slide. Nope. Are you just touching? They're not moving at all? Okay.
What's on there is not coming up there.
Okay, can you see that? Kind of. Sorry, the black is not showing up so great. But let me tell you a little bit about our parents who decided to respond to us in the quantitative and qualitative surveys. So as you can see, the majority of our parents identified as female, and that was about 2/3, just over 2/3, and then a third male. You can see also we had quite a range in terms of age. Our youngest parents were between the ages of 30 and 40, all the way up to 70 plus. So we had quite a large range of parents. Our largest group was about 51 to 60, followed by 61 to 70. And then when we looked at education, we found that our sample was really highly educated. We had, let's see, at least, I think I had 75% has at least some college. 24 to 60, yeah, it has at least a bachelor's degree or higher. So almost 30% had a bachelor's degree, almost 30% had a master's degree, and 20% had a doctorate degree. So a highly educated sample. And in terms of diversity, it's not really that diverse of a sample. 82% was white. We did have some who identified as Asian or Asian American, about 6.5%. And then about 6% identified as Hispanic or Latino, and not even 3% Black or African American. So majority white Caucasian respondents. In terms of the relationship of the parent to the child, the majority were mothers. I just want to keep making sure that my slide is moving. The majority were the mothers, about 67%, followed by fathers, about 30%. And we did have a few who identified as guardians of their children, of the children. So we asked the parents to begin by thinking about the time when their child first came out to them. And we said, I want you to think about when they came out to you. Did they write a note, a letter, an email? Was it a conversation, or in some way they indicated to you that they were LGBT+? About how long ago did that occur? So you can see that the first group, you may not be able to read it very clearly, but the first group says less than a year ago. That's 14.6%. So about 15%, this communication happened less than a year before the survey. 3% said a year ago, 9% said 2 years ago, just over 9% said 3 years ago, 4% 12 years ago, 5% 9% 5 years ago, and about 40%, 42% was 5 years or longer. So really, the responses ranged like all over the place between 1 and 10 or 10 plus years. So we had a lot of diversity in those responses. Okay, we next asked the parents, how did the communication come? How did the communication about their identity happen? And so we gave them a list of possible options to respond to, and 71% said it was a face-to-face conversation. The next largest group actually was that the parents guessed that something was different and they directly asked their children. That was almost 10%. We had about 7% who said their child initiated a telephone conversation, and about 7% said their child wrote them either an email, a letter, or a note. 5.5% said someone else told them. Okay.
So remember that we have already done one study prior to this, and that was the children of LGBT, or children who are LGBT. And in that survey, we wanted to ask a whole series of questions about their relationships with their parents. In this study, we decided it would be really interesting to ask the same set of questions, but to ask them to the parents. So we didn't mirror the entire study so that it was exactly the same between study 1 and study 2. But there were several questions that we were able to mirror because they lined up and they made sense as questions to ask both to the parents and to the kids. Now David has already said this, but just to reiterate, these were not necessarily the parents of the students or the millennials who answered questions in the first study. Keep that in mind, because just because we have one group who said one set of things doesn't mean that this was their parents or these were their children necessarily. We just don't know because it was a different sample. We asked people, within sort of the same venues to answer these questions, but we just don't know. So don't think that these parents and those kids were the same. But here are the comparisons that we looked at. We asked probably, 25 or 30 questions, and I'm only going to highlight the ones that had the biggest differences. And there's a reason why we want to show you this, and I'll describe it as we go along here. So the first one is, parents, 86% of parents reported that they listened attentively when their child came out. Same question when asked to the millennials in the first study, only 30% of those children felt that their parents listened attentively. They listened carefully. So you can see that that's almost a 60% difference. So we wonder, all right, what's going on there? Again, not the same parents as the kids, but could there be some things that are going on in terms of how people are interpreting it? Or could it be that the sample of those who were parents that were answering were completely self-selected in the sense that they were the ones who were maybe more caring and more attentive? So they got it out. Next one, 48% of parents recalled being supportive of their child's dress, the way that they dressed, while 19% of the children who were LGBT sensed that their parents supported them in their dress, how they dressed. So almost a 30% difference between those two groups. Third, 66%, 2/3 of parents felt that they were open and supportive when their child came out, while only 21% of the children who were LGBT felt that their parents were open and supportive. So a 45% gap. And then 48% of parents stated that they were open to their child's dating, meaning dating people who were also LGBT in some way, while 14% of the children who were LGBT believed that their parents were open to this dating. So almost a 34% gap. So you can see there's a big difference between the way that children are perceiving their parents and the way parents are perceiving themselves. Two possible solutions that help to explain that. One could be that this is just completely different sample, right? That the parents who responded were much more open, much more loving, much more caring. But the other thing could be is that there's a difference between how people perceive, right? So if you have someone who thinks that they're listening carefully and that they're being really supportive and open, that doesn't necessarily mean that the child perceived that of their parents. Because we all give cues and communication that's sometimes mixed and sometimes confusing. And so there could be that those parents thought that they were being supportive and loving and caring and attentive, and the kids didn't perceive them as that way. A few more data in the similar vein. 70% of parents stated that they would have defended their child against attacks of others or from others, while 20% of the children who were LGBT believed that their parents would defend them. Almost a 50% difference. 19% of parents felt that their child's coming out was a poor reflection of them as parents, while 50% of the children thought that at least one of their parents felt this way. Again, a 30% gap. 66% of parents stated that they were open to their child inviting friends to their home, while 27% of the children thought that their parents were open to inviting friends. Almost a 40% difference. And finally, 93%, almost all, of parents said that they told their child that they would love them no matter what, while only half of the children said that their parents said that they would love them no matter what. So, difference in perception or difference in the sample, we're not sure, but there are very large gaps in those areas in particular.
I'm going to say first, it was such an honor to be working with the parents that we interviewed. It took a lot of guts for them to step up and go for an interview. Some of them lasted an hour and a half, some 3 hours. And what struck me was how many of them hadn't had a chance to talk in depth about their experience of having a child who had come out. So we want to thank all the parents that participated in this study. Now I thought we would share some themes that came out, and we picked some examples that highlighted the themes that we found in the parents that we interviewed. Here's one. One parent said, "I struggled at first because of the hardline biblical perspective that most Christians have. And as a parent, I wondered what I had done wrong in raising my child to have this happen. Over time and through study, I worked through the steps of the grieving process and came to a place of acceptance, mostly. A key factor in my acceptance was that my child is an adult when they came out, so I felt they were responsible for their own choices." Here we pick up several themes that we got from many of the parents. One was that struggle that they were having between their biblical perspective and what they were being confronted with a child who was gay or LGBTQ, and trying to coordinate that and know how to move forward with that. Another theme is parents wondering, did I do something wrong to mess up my kid? Another one was some of the grief of now having to work through having a child that you never knew you had, and what that would mean for their future and their kids' future. And then that acceptance at some point where, wait, my kid is an adult, and he or she has a right to make choices in their own life. And some of that we noticed in this comment here. Another one said, "I'm a pastor who retired shortly after our son came out. I undertook a thorough study of all that I could find regarding homosexuality, what science knows and does not know, what the Bible says about same-sex relationships, what modern Christians and Adventists have written, how other Christian denominations are relating to LGBTQ issues. My study led me to conclude that SDAs have badly mistreated LGBTQ people, and although I don't have all the answers, my wife and I, all 4 of our son's siblings, are fully in support of him, both privately and publicly." Some of the themes that we picked up on this slide, on this particular response, was that a lot of the parents, when faced with this dilemma, then had to figure out what was it about. None of them had really studied it. They hadn't read about it. I remember one mother shared that she had found a journal entry of her child, and it said that he was same-sex attracted. She had no idea what that even meant and had to go look it up. This particular person looked into science, and we found that a lot of parents would turn to literature in the science to find out what was happening out there in the field. Or they'd look at other denominations and wonder, what are they doing for their kids, for their LGBTQ? Also, a theme that came out here was a lot of the parents feared that their church would not respond in a positive way to their child and would actually push their kid away from coming to church anymore. And that was a big concern for many parents, that when precisely maybe they needed the church more than ever, they were finding themselves alone. And that was a theme we found over and over. One of the things that this next entry, 2 entries show, was the importance of communication. So one parent said, one of the first things that I remember him telling me when I asked him why he made this choice, he asked me, Mom, when did you decide to be straight? And I was like, well, I didn't. I've never decided anything. It was just natural. And then he says, well, that's exactly how it is for me. Having those conversations with him just really put it into perspective for me. Another parent said, I'm listening more. I have a lot more compassion. And I think my faith is stronger and better. It's not that I'm saying it's been easy, and I'm not saying I haven't cried, but I'm stronger. And I think it's made our dialogue with her stronger because we said how important it is for us as parents to really feel that she knows how much Jesus loves her and how much that it is what God wants her with him. Her salvation is number 1. We want her strong with God. We talked a lot about this, and I think that's good. The themes that I feel this represented, these entries represented, was that good communication really helped all the parents and their kids that were involved in these conversations. Some parents we did come across that totally cut their kids off, thinking that was maybe the best way, best tools that they had to respond to their child. But in reality, what we found is this communication gave the parents the opportunity to share with their kids that they were still very much loved, that they cared for them very much, and that they could also share God's perspective and God's love to their kids. If they had cut off their kid, they wouldn't have been able to share that with their child. And sometimes that might be the only link that would keep a kid alive, right? Because we know that our Adventist youth are like the rest of those who come from conservative families. Eight times greater is the possibility of committing suicide. So if we know that, why would we cut off the communication with our young people? And this was something we found in our sample. Many of them worked to keep that conversation open. Here we have 3 entries on parents that turn to prayer and turn to their own spiritual journey to make sense of what was happening. Instead of praying that her sexual orientation would change, I prayed that her love for the Lord will outweigh her desire for a gay relationship. Another parent said, I still pray for this, but know from others who are gay that no matter how much they have prayed, they are still gay. And another parent said, I did a lot of yelling at God. I had to mourn that I would never have a daughter-in-law, grandchildren like my peers, and I was worried at how his church family would react. I was willing to leave my church to protect him, but never leave my Jesus. This was a theme that we found in some of the parents. Prayer became very important to them, and they spent many tears as they would pray to God, almost as if he was the only one that sometimes many of them could reach out to. Turning to their church friends and family was scary. They weren't sure if their friends and family who didn't know, if they would be rejected. There was some worries on how the LGBTQ child, again, would be treated by their church, And again, we find themes here of a parent losing their dreams as a parent to have a daughter-in-law, son-in-law, grandchildren, etc. Here on the theme that I found was common was the shock for some parents. Some parents knew. The majority of them were like shocked now with this reality. And this one mother told me, it was so shocking to me I lost half my hair. Literally, half my hair fell out. It was such a mournful time. I couldn't get past it. Both of us, my husband and I, felt like we'd been through a little bit of a war or something, like we were in PTSD, kind of like overwhelmed by sadness. But then it got better. I think one thing that helped me was watching others talk about how much they loved their gay child. Although they grieved, they still grieved because they felt their child was now going to have a difficult life. It's not an easy life, it just isn't. Some of the themes that come out here that we picked up from other parents was how important it was to love their child no matter what. They struggled with belief and the fear of what would happen to their child now that they were openly gay. What would happen to them in their work, in their neighborhoods, in their churches. And the shock that they went through and the loneliness. I picked up a lot of loneliness as I interviewed these parents as to who do I talk to now? When the child first came out, what we did notice in many of our parents is this surge to let their child know that they love them no matter what. They wanted them to know that they were loved unconditionally. One parent said, I fully accepted my child's sexual orientation, but I needed support to reconcile what I had been taught through the SDA church with this reality. I had to look for help outside of the church for the support I needed. And so we put our arms around him and we said, our love is the same no matter what you have said to us. We wanted to affirm him, and so it was basically an affirmation session. We wanted to show a kind of unconditional love for him no matter what he would have told us. He expressed relief after we talked. This was very, very common. And I know as researchers, we wondered out loud, were some of these parents aware, most likely they were, of the statistics of how many do take their own lives? And wouldn't that have been like one of the main motivators to let their child know that no matter what they were telling them, they were unconditionally loved? Also, there's a relief, a theme here of relief that once shared, it's like now we can get to the issues that we need to at hand, and we don't have to carry around the secrets. The reality is, many of the parents said it's going to be a hard life for them. I know it is, but I wonder if we recognize, as importantly, how much harder it is to live a life in secret, to live a life that's fake, to live a life that's where you think that nobody really knows you. That has to be much harder than finally coming out and accepting where you're going in life. So I'm hoping that brings some consolation to some parents. It is not good for people to live alone. I went to the wedding of my son and his male spouse. I love them both as my sons. I believe they are faithful, and to me, that is what matters. I do wish there was a way for them to find a place in the church. They do not feel they would be welcome. They are both kind and helpful, and I love to go visit them and have them visit me. I just thought, well, finally we know. Finally we have a conclusion. We have the answer to our question, and there's kind of a new beginning. At this point, I was thinking, well, finally we know, and now we can go from here. We can start figuring things out where we are at this point. because we really weren't sure where we were a few months before. One of the things that we did find among some of the parents was this relief of, good, now I know what's been happening. Now I know what happened that summer she was away, or he went into this deep depression and we couldn't figure out what was happening. It was like pieces of the puzzle had been put together. 66% of our parents reported being open to having their kids' LGBTQ plus friends over, while 13.5% said they were not open to this. He knows he and his spouse is always welcome into our home, was one of the responses. Another said, we would prefer not to have these friends over. And another mother who really was not very accepting, openly she seemed to be to her daughter, but so many fears were in her head. She said, she brought her girlfriend for Christmas and we all survived. You could just imagine some of the dynamics that happen in a family with this sudden news, right? Suddenly they're bringing home friends and possibly significant others. And how does the family wrap their head around all that? I knew my child wanted a relationship with someone he was attracted to in the same way that I had been when I was his age. I did not feel the need to dissuade or deprive him of that. It has not changed. And in fact, he is married now to a wonderful man, and I support him with his marriage in the same manner as I support my straight children. That is a whole topic that these parents are having to deal with and come to terms with. My child has not begun dating in earnest, but when that happens, I'd rather know who my child is dating rather than be kept in the dark. Another parent said, I know that being gay is not about sex any more than being heterosexual is about sex. They are no different than straight people when it comes to relationships. Like all human beings, they desire emotional, spiritual, physical attraction. They share the same compulsion to fall in love, find companionship, and share their life with someone. Yes, my support continues to evolve with more and more understanding and love for my son and his boyfriend, as I prepare myself for what journey may still be ahead. Many of them have this theme of time has helped them. Finding out more information has helped them. And yet what lies ahead is anyone's guess. What they learned when their child came out, one parent said, my child had to teach me how to talk with all this new terminology and with a gender change. It took a while to get all the pronouns right. She was a little less patient with my efforts than I would have hoped for. Can you imagine your child goes from a she to a he, or a he to a she, and then that creates the need to change pronouns. And the frustration of not being able to make that change quick enough. It wasn't about myself. At first I was worried about what people were saying and what they would think about me. Afterwards, I stopped thinking that way. I realized I needed to focus on this kid, making sure that he's safe and making sure he's well loved. Many parents went from, what are they going to think of me? Was I a bad parent? To what is my church going to think of me? To, wait a minute, I've got to think about my child. That was a common journey. Nothing has changed with time. My local church and pastor are very supportive, and I have not been subject to negative statements from my church members. I know that some may not agree, but they have kept it to themselves. Whenever I talked with parents who had that experience, it was they felt it was such a blessing to be among those members who were supportive to their child. If I encounter people who demean others, I normally address that directly for the purpose of raising their awareness and increasing their sensitivity towards others who are different from them.
Okay, so let's move on to another question that we asked. We wanted to know about the parents' perception of the level of acceptance they had towards their child's sexual orientation or gender identity. So we asked them a question where we allowed them to select multiple responses. So what you have here is the answers to the level of acceptance. So 64.4% of our parents checked that they fully accepting of her sexual orientation or gender identity. Another 37% checked, I outwardly show acceptance of my child's sexual orientation and or gender identity, but inwardly I'm fearful for them, and I pray for God's love and protection over them. What you should know is this column doesn't add to 100% because people are checking multiple boxes, just clarifying that. 21% checked, I accept my child's gender identity while upholding a traditional biblical understanding. We had about 11% check, I'm confused about my child's sexual orientation, gender identity, and I'm not sure how I feel. Almost 12% checked, I'm willing to accept my child's sexual orientation, gender identity, but I pray that he or she will not become sexually active. 10% said, I uphold and support my church's teachings and cannot condone same-sex sexual behavior, it is sinful. And then 10% said, I love my child, but I do not accept his or her sexual orientation or gender identity. So we also asked them how their level of acceptance differed from that of their spouse. On the top line, you see that almost 46% said, my spouse and I currently have the same level of acceptance for our child. The next line says, I'm more accepting than my spouse, and that was about 28%. The third line says, my spouse is more accepting than I am, about 10%. The next line says, we haven't talked about it, less than 2%. And then about 15%, it was a single parent home or just a guardian. So they did not have a spouse. We also said, what was your level of involvement when your child came out? This is really interesting. Nearly, I think it's just over 90%, or just at 90% of the sample, agreed or strongly agreed that they were very involved in their church when their child came out. So this is an active group of parents. One parent said, I have slowly withdrawn from my church activities and church attendance after my child came out, just so you know this is after. When I attend church, I am able to enjoy my communion with God. However, there always remains a pain in my heart when I think about the fact that my gay children are not welcome to participate as active members of the SDA church. This makes it difficult for me to attend because I feel like I'm betraying my children. Why should I be a part of an organization who does not see my children as they have been created by God himself? Another parent said, I am still involved. I hope to help people be more aware and accepting of the LGBT community. I know it's a sticky wicket, but isn't it no less of a sin than to be a fat elder praying the morning prayer up front? Or isn't pride a worse sin than sexual sin? We need to get used to worshiping with broken people. And a third parent said, we do not attend church because I don't trust the church to not damage his relationship with God. I believe we would be treated in uncaring ways and we would feel isolated. So we asked them another question about essentially their religious perspective since their child came out. And again, we allowed them to check multiple boxes. So 66% of the sample checked that they believed in taking a historical context of the Bible into account, that it is important when dealing with issues of sexuality and gender. Just over 57% checked, I have questions about how my church interprets scripture regarding homosexuality. Just over 50% also checked, I find that my interpretation of scripture has changed to accommodate gender identity and sexual orientation as we know it today. Nearly 17% said, I continue to believe homosexuality to be a sin. And then nearly 16% said, I continue to support the biblical teaching of my church when it comes to gender identity and sexual orientation. Some parents, I continue to believe that homosexual behavior, including lustful thoughts, is a sin, just as heterosexual adultery, including lustful thoughts, is a sin. Another parent said, I have read the Greek translations and the interpretation of homosexual sin, and it does appear that the sin is more about prostitution and about sex slaves, not about consenting couples. I think there should be more study on this. And then third, sexual orientation is not sin. Sexual behavior may be questionable. Irresponsible lifestyle is a sin in either a straight or gay relationship.
So we asked the parents, what are some of the barriers that kept you from coming to terms with your child's orientation or identity? And so here are some really interesting responses. My fears about how my child will be treated, again, we've heard that theme over and over again from the qualitative data as well. My biblical understanding of homosexuality, about 40%. My spouse's or other family members' fears and biases about it, almost 30%. None, 28%. My own fears and biases about homosexuality, 26%. My church or pastor's view on the issue, almost 21%. And some parents quotes, I understand the Bible to teach it is a sin. My spouse is very anti-gay and will not understand this at any level. My fears about how this would affect my employment since I work in an SDA organization. It wasn't really a barrier, just a concern. I knew I would not be able to control how others view or treated my child, which I guess is something all parents have to come to terms with for many reasons. And another one, our child's sexual orientation or gender identity has caused conflict between me and my spouse. Well, there's a small number, 6.8%, who strongly agree, another 5% who agree, 9% somewhat agree. But look at mostly people strongly disagree or disagree. So this doesn't seem to have been a major barrier between the majority of spouses that has caused a major conflict, but between a significant number. Next, our child's sexual orientation or gender identity has caused conflict between me and the members of my church. Again, you can see 14% strongly disagree, 25% disagree, 4% somewhat disagree, but there's a significant number who have had some conflict between themselves and members of their church. So again, it's an issue that a lot of parents are fearful about, that needs to be taken into account. And finally, our child's sexual orientation has caused conflict between me and our church pastor. You can see over 50% have not found that to be an issue, 26% neither agree nor disagree, and a small number, less than 20%, have found this to be an issue between them and their pastor.
So we also wanted to know what was the most helpful, or at least some things that parents found helpful in helping them to understand their child's sexual orientation or gender identity. So these are from the most helpful ranked down to the least helpful. And again, people could choose more than one category. 83%, and the column on the right is the actual number of people who responded in that way, if you're wondering what that right column is. So keep remembering that about 110 people completed the entire survey. Most helpful, 83%, said listening carefully to my child's experience. Second most helpful, at 61%, reading science-based literature or books about sexual orientation or gender identity. About 50% or half said having friends who were LGBT+. Almost the same amount, 45%, said getting to know my child's LGBT+ friends. 42% internet searches on sexual orientation or gender identity. 40% other Adventists I know who had an LGBT child, so they were networking with each other, one of the benefits potentially of the internet. and getting to know the LGBT person that my child is dating, about 40%. Continuing on, same question, again going down in total percentage who agreed. Having other family members who are also LGBT, almost 30%. 25% non-SDA support groups for LGBT family members. We really aren't aware, I don't think, outside of a few isolated locations where there are support groups for family members of LGBT parents who are Adventist. Is that correct? Okay, so when people are finding support groups, they're going outside of the Adventist church to find them. 20% said getting involved in activities for LGBT plus individuals, pride parades, support groups, etc. About 15% said SDA support groups for LGBT family members. So I don't know, it may be possible that this is an online phenomenon for about 15%. And then the North American division book called Guiding Families of LGBT Loved Ones, which we'll highlight for you in just a moment. You can see that there's a very small percentage, only 10% that actually know about this resource. We're going to broaden that number today by showing it to you. And then about less than 10% said conversations with their pastors were helpful. Let that sink in for just a moment. Which of the following resources might have been helpful to you and your family after your child came out? Top answer, informed pastoral care, 60%. Flip back just a second, the last one, conversations with my pastor, about 9% found them helpful, but about 60% wish that informed pastoral care were there. Second most common response, oh no, these aren't ranked, I'm sorry. Which of the following resources? About 40% said social media support, blogs, Facebook support pages. 50% publications available either through Advent Source or online that help parents to understand identity or orientation. About half, again, family support group meetings held in the church would have been helpful to them. They also wished, almost 75%, better training to inform our church's youth pastors and ministers. I think that goes along with even higher than informed pastoral care, that top number. About 60% wished for in-person support groups for SDA family members of LGBT plus individuals. And about a third said community support groups. These are the groups that they might find if they were to go to parents, families, friends of lesbians and gays, other groups that are part of the broader community that are not Adventist. So a few quotes. The knowledge, one parent said, that gender identity is a continuum, not an either-or kind of thing. Another parent said, there was no support at the time. We all had to go out on our own. Everybody was too busy worrying about AIDS. I'm guessing this was a parent whose child came out in the 80s when there was a lot of people that were dying from AIDS and a lot of fear. The last parent said, the existence of support groups might have given me the courage to come out as the parent of an LGBT individual myself. I know there are other families dealing with this, probably some I know, but I don't know who they are and who can and cannot be trusted. Another few parents responded, my P flag, remember that's the parents and families group, was the only support available, and also remember that was an outside the church group in the community. Another parent said social media was helpful, didn't choose to access any other options. And then the last parent said, this sounds pretty terrible, but because of the spiritual component, I really only want support from other Christians. It's too difficult for non-believers to understand the spiritual fears a parent has, I imagine. I have a Christian counselor I've seen several times. It has been helpful. In addition, I spoke over the phone with an Adventist pastor I called who has been open about his own child's gender identity. He was extremely helpful in the first days of shock. So the book that you may or may not know about is a resource that's been published by the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. And we were quite excited when this came out, in part because this was what David mentioned earlier, this Commission on Sexuality for the North American Division. And they decided that they wanted to create a resource, and so they worked with a man named Bill Henson, who was someone who created a similar resource for, Steve, what was the denomination that Bill is an interdenominational publication. So several people in this room helped not only with the statistics from the first research that we did, the first study that we did, but also helping in editing and in some cases helping to write and putting this together. And so this is a very practical resource that is designed for family members to use when they're trying to work with their LGBT children. One of the things that you'll note very, very clearly and up front, this says that this is not trying to diminish or eliminate the Adventist perspective. What this booklet is trying to do is to say, no matter how you think or feel about this issue, whether or not you think that this is something that's a natural part of human sexuality, or whether you consider it to be a sin or not a sin, when it comes down to your children, none of that matters. What matters is that you give your children love and support and care, and this gives you practical, tangible ways to do that. And again, it's not trying to change people's minds, and it's not trying to change church policy. It's trying to say, above all, we need to love, care for, support the people who are in our families, who are in our churches, who have LGBT individuals in their lives. We have a number of copies in case anybody wants a copy afterwards up front. Oh, Haven. Sorry, Nancy.
Shannon and I are going to just take a moment to talk about the Haven Care Group on our campus. The group's been going now about 1.5 years, I believe. Is that about right?
I think just 1.5 years.
1.5 years. So, and we were asked to co-facilitate the group, and the group is designed to be a safe place on campus for students who are LGBT to come, to talk with others who are also LGBT, and because often they don't find, as Nancy mentioned earlier, they don't find a safe place anywhere where they can talk with people who identify as LGBT. And so one of the things that's been a challenge is spreading the word. One of the ways that we've done that is at new student orientation this year. Some of us got up and just let people know that there was a care group in case people needed it, for themselves or knew a friend who was there. Because a lot of our students, when we listen to them carefully, as the data showed in our parent study, when we listen to them carefully, they find that they can't speak openly on campus still. They get a lot of pushback, a lot of side comments or behavior toward them. So this is a safe group for them to come and to be affirmed and loved on. And that's the basic goal of the group.
Yeah, it's been quite a privilege to go on this journey with David and with our students, and just to make sense of what a caring space is, actually. And I'm struck and amazed every single day at the compassion that our students have for each other and for the other students on this campus. They have a lot of things, a lot of challenges to address, being Adventist or not being Adventist, identifying as LGBT+. So it's something that either they're hiding or they're not hiding, and when you come to Haven, you just kind of get to be there. And we eat, we have fun with each other, we enjoy each other, but it's just a caring space. And I'm just so privileged to see how much they're concerned for people like themselves, and want them to be involved and to experience some of the things that they're experiencing at Haven as well.
And finally, many of them have the courage when we ask them to come and even speak at our classes I teach a class on human sexuality. I teach marriage and family, and we talk about sexuality in those classes and have a section on LGBT experiences. And many of them have been so gracious as to come and share and ask, hear some really hard questions and answer those questions with grace. And so they've been a very important part of kind of helping to educate our larger campus as well. That's it.
Okay, some conclusions to kind of summarize what we've talked about. Overall, we find a group of people amongst us in our churches who have had to face some very difficult and painful situations, yet they've shown such resiliency as they've worked through these issues, trying to maintain a strong family, keep their relationships close with their kids. And I think this speaks to the strength of the Adventist family and what they are facing when they experience such adversity. The coming out experience was a stressful one for these families, and our sample often demonstrated a clash of two strong emotions. On the one hand, they sought to intentionally offer a statement of unconditional love, and yet they knew how damaging parental rejection was going to be. That's why they were really forceful in that. But then on the other hand, they often had internal angst caused by fears and worries about how their child would be treated in the community, churches, or in the world due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. And they were often also confused and conflicted by their own previous biblical beliefs about LGBT plus issues, and often had to struggle to reconcile their beliefs with their desire to love and support their child, including learning new terms and new ways to provide support. So now recommendations. What can we all walk away from and carry with us as we enter back into our own communities? I guess first of all, we would recommend to be humble enough to know that we don't have all the answers. We've gotten a glimpse of the lives of these families, but we don't have all the answers for them. Second, learn all you can about sexuality and gender identity issues. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, and therefore we're complex beings. Read about it. If you have a nephew, a grandchild, a son, a daughter, there are resources out there to inform yourself more. Learn cultural competency skills related to the LGBT plus population. How can you learn to talk with them and open up these conversations? Examine your own beliefs very closely about what the Bible says, and get to know LGBTQ plus individuals and their family members. Find out who's in your community or in your church who have an LGBTQ person in their family. There was a recent study that actually showed that just knowing one gay person helps us understand so much more and appreciate so much more of their journey. Just one. Philosophically, understand that Christians in various denominations have differing understandings of biblical teaching on the morality of being LGBT+, and the practice of LGBT+ behavior. However, all churches, Christian ethics require love and welcome and respect for all people who come to our churches. Since the rejection of LGBT+ persons by family and church members is highly correlated with depression, suicidal ideation, and attempts, it becomes a social justice issue to advocate for these LGBT clients and their families. Listen to the LGBT persons, their parents, listen to their stories, and try not to impose your beliefs on them. Pray for inspired understanding so that you will be able to be an instrument of healing and love in a world that's often hate-filled.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. Put up your hand if you have a question. Two of us will be running around with the microphones. You can address your questions to one of the panel members. If they don't specify a panel member, we'll let you decide who takes the question. Who wants to offer the first question?
I think one issue you kind of skirted around here is what is the current position of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on this issue? I've lived long enough to hear it referred to as a sin, to hear it referred to as an illness that needs to be, overcome by therapy, which never worked very well anyway. What is the current position that we're dealing with when the North American Division, put out this magazine?
Thank you. The current position of our church is not that it's a sin to be gay. It's not a sin to be gay. There's enough research that shows it's a very complex issue, and our church recognizes that. But our church's position is that to practice homosexual relationships is not biblical.
I think it's important to point out, too, that our church has moved on this issue. I can remember in the 90s, it was an abomination, and people were damned to hell, right? For us to move from that position to the current one, there's been a growing understanding, I think, which is important to notice. And yes, it would be celibacy, it would be what the church is recommending for LGBT people.
I'd also like to just add that ours is a global church, and in different parts of the world there are very different understandings than there are in North America. In some parts of the world, if you dare reveal that you're gay, your life is in danger. And so I think it's important to understand that as a global church, we're in very different places depending on where we are.
Thank you for the information. There was a question in my mind about parenting. Was there any indication into what level of indication, was there any possibilities of change in parenting style in change of sexual orientation? Was there any indication at all? So did the parenting style towards the child have any change or not at all? The questions may not have answered that, but in your conversations, was there any indication?
Are you referring to when they came out, did their parenting style change, or are you suggesting that maybe their parenting style led them to have gay children? I'm not sure I understand.
So was their parenting style change after they came out as compared to before?
I don't know if I perceived anything, any big change. What we did notice was that if they had closeness and good communication and sort of a healthy family system to begin with, then when the family was confronted with this humongous issue, that those skills continued to help them. But if the family had a weak system of communication, poor solution focusing skills, then when the child came out in the crisis, it made things go worse even, so that non-communication became even greater.
One comment that I would give back to that, and having permission from my gay child to identify myself as a parent of a gay child, I checked with her before I said anything, is that I certainly re-examined my parenting style. I said, I kind of knew the rules I thought I was going to apply to a straight child. How do I apply those rules to a gay child? And that does raise issues and questions, sleepovers and all those kinds of things. How am I going to do this in a consistent way? It raised problems with being consistent. One question I had in terms of going way back in the presentation, was there anything you think you could take out of the demographics of the millennial group and the demographics of the parent group to say how much they may or may not have overlapped? Because I'm curious as to whether there was a racial disparity that would give you a clue. I don't know if that's appropriate to ask that or not. I think it's certainly possible that many parents who try to feel positive about their gay children were more likely to participate in your study. And maybe you got a broader sample of the millennials, that they were all willing to participate, but maybe the parents were not all willing to participate. And then the third thing I want to say is, what do I want as a parent of a gay child who's a practicing Adventist who loves this church? Two things. I want my girls who are leaders in the church to be able to still be leaders in the church. And I want a support group. I really want a support group.
Oh, you got me? Okay. Yeah, I just had a question. So, based on what you said about the North American Division's stance on that, out of your parents, were any of their children celibate? And did any of them indicate they wanted to change?
Yeah, those are questions that we didn't ask. And in the first study, we were most interested in understanding what the relationships were between parents and children and kind of the journey that they had and the risk and protective factors that might have helped them as they were kind of negotiating their coming out. In the second study, we were interested in hearing parents' perspectives and journeys as their children came out. And so we weren't asking questions about their sexual behaviors, and we weren't asking questions about how they were dealing with their own kind of sexual journeys as part of that process. We were more interested in the relationship issues, I think, than we were than the sex, to put it bluntly. And also, I'm sorry, to answer the question that you had prior, or maybe it was a statement as well, I think it's quite likely, you're right, that first of all, our first study had a more diverse group of adult children who were responding. And I think that that probably would help to explain maybe even some of the diversity of the responses. And I think also in the second study, parents are much more likely who have been, should I say, more, I don't know if successful is the right word, but who have been more comfortable and more reconciled with their children to be willing to participate in the study. And so by definition, you saw only about 16% who said that they, still felt really strongly that, that their child was sinning and that they were sort of going against biblical principles. And we would only be able to hypothesize, I guess, that those might have more conflicting relationship struggles between the parents and the kids as well. But the vast majority of them were much more supportive as parents. And that's just the way the sample skewed.
Another factor, I think, in answer to that question is that 20% in our first millennial study never came out to their families, so it's unlikely that their parents would have responded because they didn't know. So again, they didn't feel like they could come out, so I think that's another variable.
With regards to what you were saying about when you have a gay child, some of the parenting decisions that you have to make that you're kind of struggling with, what are the answers with sleepovers, for example. I remember one parent shared with me that he was prepared to teach his children how to date, the rules of dating when it was an opposite gender. But now, he's got a gay son, And what does he tell his gay son? And so yeah, I think what you described was something that often we don't even think about, but even just parenting a child who you aren't ready to parent, in a sense, you have questions all over. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
So my question is, first, thank you for the information, it's very helpful. But going forward, what is it that we're doing as North American Division? You've mentioned the magazine that came out to inform people, but what are we doing in our churches now to help parents that are going through what they're going through and the kids that are going through what they're going through? What are we doing now? Are we putting groups in our churches and educating our leaders and our elders so that they are aware that these things are happening, and how welcoming are they to these people? You know, it's all nice and good here at Andrews, but what about the other churches all over?
We agree, Carlene. I think the short answer is that in most places not much is happening. As you saw from the parents' responses, in most cases they had to go outside of their church communities in order to get resources and support, or because the internet does allow you to reach people in ways that you might not have been able to otherwise, that some of those supports were able to, develop naturally. I mean, for many, many years, most of you are maybe aware that we have Kinship International, which is a group of LGBT individuals who identify as current or former SDAs, and they, I think, have been as active as they possibly can across the world, trying to connect with people who have come out as gay or lesbian. I don't think that group has been integrated in any meaningful ways into the church structure. And so I think that they have, in lots of ways, kind of stayed marginalized and in some cases demonized. And I think that has been a particular challenge. I think that there have been a few people like Carol Grady who have been, up till now, kind of voices crying in the wilderness as a parent of a gay child, trying to spread the word with information and resources and other things, and certainly she reaches more people than you would normally find just because of the internet, but I think it's still an ongoing challenge. And I don't know, David, maybe you can talk more about this Commission on Sexuality and what they would hope to have happen besides a resource booklet, if they have hopes of developing more resources within church besides just a manual.
Let me begin by saying that, as Nancy said earlier, we're not where we used to be as a church, and I think we've come a long ways, but we have a long way still to go. But I think some of us have been invited to speak before leadership groups of the church. The Health Ministries Conference back in Albuquerque, some of us went and spoke there. Some of us have been invited to speak in other professional venues where we are sharing the results of our study. And the NAD teachers meetings, they all received one of these as a part of the educational program, and so things are happening. We're presenting at professional conferences regularly, and so we're hoping that through those kinds of efforts, things will happen. But the Dr. Ahn, the leader of the Sexual Commission for the NAD, when he read a report, I mean, he was very excited about the findings, and one of the things that he said is, I want to see if we can have you work with the education department to come up with an anti-bullying campaign for our schools. And so that's one thing that it hasn't happened yet, but it's on the wish list, and we're hoping to be able to continue, finish some of the publications that we've begun, and that could become a reality. And sometimes it's a gentle nudge that we have to make, to make things happen. So we're gently nudging in a lot of different ways.
And I think the last thing that we try to keep letting people know is that we aren't trying as a group to change church policy. What we are trying to do is to advocate for more acceptance, inclusion, and support, because you may or may not remember from our first study, I think the most startling findings that we had were that 1/3 of the people who responded had in the past 6 months thought about suicide, and 1/3 of the population that responded said that they had made a suicide attempt in their life. We can't ignore the consequences of rejecting people in our church. The consequences are just too high, and so even if we're not trying to change policy, or we're not trying to change people's perspectives on the Bible, or that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is, how do we create safe spaces? How do we create loving spaces? How do we keep our loved ones safe and cared for and supported so that they don't, A, leave the church, B, kill themselves, and C, have some sort of meaningful life outside of where they have grown up?
I'd also like to make an offer, and that is, if there is someone who'd like to start a parent support group, we would love to support you in doing that. And so, talk to us, come and to see if there's something that we might be able to do to help, because we have some experience with care group, here on campus. So maybe that is something that could start around here. That would be great. The other thing I'd like to say is this, that there are going to be some of these available, but if you don't get one, you can get one of these from Advent Source, free, I think. You can get a couple just by paying shipping and handling if you want to get one of these. So they are widely available, so if anyone wants one.
And just as a quick caveat, just so that we keep ourselves less vulnerable, is if I think if parents wanted to do a support group, I don't know that we're trying to say that the university is sponsoring or supporting, but I think that we personally would be happy to be involved in how that might happen. But that's a side gig. It's not the Andrews University saying yes, we will go the next step. I would say that the administration at Andrews has been incredibly supportive and has really worked hard to walk that fine line between supporting the traditional church stance on the one hand, but also saying we need to find ways of loving, caring, and supporting our students. And I applaud and appreciate that a lot.
I want to maybe ask a very sensitive question. I'm a sociologist. I don't usually get involved in these detailed, kind of intimate discussions with people. Kurt and I had a colleague, gay colleague that I'd worked with for probably 5 to 10 years, very closely on a number of research projects. He got AIDS. He died. I worked with him many years. He was one of the kindest, most Christ-like people I knew. He worried about fairness, good ethics in the quality of his work, treating everyone fairly in the project, making sure they got what they needed from the project for their careers. I went to his funeral, and colleagues at the funeral asked me to speak to his parents. His parents were fundamentalist Baptists. They told people at the funeral they thought he was burning in hell forever. And they asked me to speak to his parents, and I did. And I said, look, he's the most Christ-like of my colleagues. Not that Chris not Christ-like, but he's the most Christ-like of my colleagues. He cared for everyone equally. He made sure everyone got what they needed. He was the most fair, Christ-like person I knew. And I talked about the radical grace of Christ, Baptist, and that I didn't think he was burning in hell. I thought Christ had saved him. And I'm not sure how it went. It was kind of stony-faced on their part. Did any of the parents you talked to deal with salvation issues with their children who were gay?
Yeah, a lot of the parents did struggle with that dilemma of wanting to show unconditional love, and on the other hand, fearing that their child might be lost in heaven and to go to heaven, and that dilemma. And that actually pushed many parents to continue searching. when you have your child that you love and you're close to and you know their lifestyle before they come out, there's a sense of, he's not a bad person, she's one of the most beautiful people I know, right? And so it creates sort of a dissonance in your mind as to, how do I make sense of this, right? And so it did lead a lot of parents to feel that way. I believe that they tried not to show their child that those were private concerns they had that I think they wish they could have shared with their pastors, right, or maybe other friends.
Okay, as a pastor, I guess I found the struggle is to maintain the reality that this is a sin outside of the will of God, but still show love and compassion and care, but maintaining the correct biblical perspective. And, I believe that we need to show love and consideration and care because, God is love, and that's what we want to manifest. But I still think it has to be balanced with the reality that this is something outside of God's will. And, and it will, as we stand outside of God's will, we don't know what happens in the last moments of a person's life. But it's those who hold on to sin, stand outside of the will of God, and eventually will be eternally punished as a result. So it's a very, very serious situation. I do think that we need to develop or help the parents with support groups and so on that would help teach parents how to work with their kids, their children. So number one, they can avoid this lifestyle, and number two, they can help to show them ways of overcoming this problem. And I do believe that something like that needs to be developed.
Would you like a response, or are you just making a statement? I believe that you're right in that God, the foundation of all God's law is love. The two great commandments, Jesus said, on these two hang all the law and the prophets. So they all have to be filtered through, through love. At the same time, I think it's important the lens through which we look at this. And again, as Kurt mentioned, the resources that we have are not trying to change anyone's mind at all. But when you understand that around the world, if you come out, you may be dead. As I've had seminary students tell me that their experience was when someone they tried to bring into the church as a pastor came out to them, the elders went out and killed them. We need to get beyond that. And so we need to look at this, I think, from multiple lenses, not just the theological lens, but I do think that a social justice lens is important as well, that people who are in danger of being killed, people who are bullied simply because they happen to be gay, not because they practiced or anything, just because they are. We need to begin looking at that more carefully, and in many ways be safe places, even as pastors, for people to come and to share their journey. And for me, as a Haven co-facilitator, I see my job not to talk anyone out of anything, but to walk alongside them on their journey, to represent Christ to them and Christ's love to them, and to be a sounding board, you know, in case they ask questions or whatever. But it's more to be Christ to them than to say you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. So again, that's my own take as a seminary professor and where I'm at right now. I'm not saying you need to be or anyone else needs to be where I'm at. That's just where I'm at today.
I have one simple question. We read that some people were straight and after many years, 50s and 60s, became homosexual, even though had children and grandchildren. Is it any change in homosexual after a period of time to be straight?
Well, maybe more than one of us will try to respond to that. I think what a lot of the research data shows about people who have lived as heterosexual people and have had children, grandchildren, is that many of them have been suppressing what their identity is because they weren't supposed to be gay. You know, when you're taught that it's inappropriate and sinful and you know you're disgusting or an abomination, then the natural thing is to suppress those urges that you might have. And there are many people that the literature reveals that have suppressed it and later on felt like they needed to be honest with themselves and therefore have come out as gay. On the other side of the coin, you ask the question, can anyone who is gay stop being gay? And there are, let me say this. Most of the research shows that that's more harmful than good. That's what the literature shows. That even people who are friends of mine who say that they're former gay people, they are very open about saying, but I still have same-sex attraction, but I'm just choosing not to act on it anymore. But you can't pray the gay away, or it just doesn't normally work that way. Now, having said that, there are people, for example, in coming out ministry, who would say that they used to be gay, but they're no longer gay. They don't identify as gay. They identify as children of God, and therefore they don't see themselves as being gay. And I don't want to take away their experience. That's their journey, that's their experience, and I want to be gracious enough to say, if that's your experience, I'm happy for you. At the same time, please don't tell me what another person's experience needs to be also. We need to be gracious going both ways. That's my view on things.
Limit the power of God and change people.
I think also another item that is important to keep in mind as we study human sexuality more is that it's not one or the other. There's a continuum. And when we start studying human sexual behavior, we find that, yes, there are some that are totally straight, right? And then on the other continuum side, we have those who would identify as being totally homosexual. But we have bisexual too. And then in between all of those, there are many different nuances of one's sexual experience. I think it's comfortable for us to say, I'm a boy, I'm a girl. I'm gay, I'm straight, right? And I think it's what we do as humans to label each other, to understand and identify who we are. But in reality, it's much more complicated than that. And respecting each person's journey, I think, is something that we're not very good at. We like black and white answers to a lot of our questions. So you might have an individual who is maybe more in the middle and could go in either direction. And maybe one time in their life they were married to an opposite gender person, and then we don't know, but that is possible and can happen. And it's a very personal journey that I wouldn't ever be able to explain or try to explain.
I've hesitated to speak, not because I don't want to, but because I'm afraid I'm going to fall apart. It's wonderful to put a face to the voice that I heard on Skype. Somehow we didn't get face to face. I'm the other parent of the child I talked about earlier. Our conversation was long. It was hard. I cried a lot. I love my child. First thing I told her, you always have a room at the table. You're welcome in our house, no matter what. I also want to say I really, really appreciate the work you guys are doing here. She came to Andrews and was able to kind of find herself. She was getting ready. She had won BSCF, Young Artist, a new composition. And about 5 minutes before she went on stage, she told us, the first thing I told her is, I love you no matter what. She became active in All for One, was president for a year, her sophomore year. Unfortunately, as a result of that, she was not hired back to summer camp. She loved the kids. And we partly because, the church structure doesn't want her because of who she is. She does not feel welcome in our church. As she was involved with Dean Yeagley and helping to formulate the statements that Andrews University has put out and active in Haven. But she doesn't feel welcome in PMC. She barely feels welcome at her home church. She put out a little survey on Instagram. If I don't feel welcome in my church, what should I do? One respondent says, stay and work from the inside. Everybody else said, leave. That killed me. She loves teaching. She's a capable teacher, but she will never teach in a heaven school. I just appreciate the support that she's had, from people like you, Dean Yeagley, and others on campus who have helped her in her journey. And
I've heard over and over and over, and I think we would be amiss to not recognize that we're part of the church that's doing that to your beautiful, intelligent, wonderful child. And if we had more of an understanding, I think, as a community, how we alienate these kids, maybe we could do something more, and we know we should. So you sharing that was just such a gift to us. Thank you for doing that.
We'll take one or two more questions.
I would like you to clarify me the fact that you say that it's no more sin being, in a homosexual relationship. Did you mention it? This is what I understood. That's what you told us. How it is not seeing the homosexuality, why the Lord destroys Sodom and Gomorrah.
The church has studied this issue, and some of the finest theologians that we have looked at the complexity of the various roads to becoming gay. And one of the things that they have seen is that people don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I think I'll be gay. I think I will subject myself to all the ridicule and the bullying, that people have. In fact, many people that we have researched, when they come to the realization that they're gay, it's like they don't want to be gay because they know what lies ahead. And yet, as some of our respondents showed, I don't decide to be heterosexual. I just am. For them, they were simply born with same-sex attraction. That's simply who they are. For whatever reason, there are many reasons why, but people are simply born that way. The church acknowledges that people, the vast majority of people don't make a conscious decision to switch. Well, I'm heterosexual, I think I want to be gay, so I'm going to just switch. It's simply a part of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And the church acknowledges that is the reality. What we do with that, the church is saying, makes a difference, but it's not being gay. They're acknowledging that is simply a part of what a person is. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's not one we can talk to you about that afterwards. How about that?
We'll take a last question right here.
Mine is more of a comment. God is a God of love. He will judge in the end our behavior. And really, homosexuality, sexual orientation is really biochemical. If you look around this room, there are a lot of men with white hair, and I suspect they're not the stallions they were 25 years ago or 30 years ago. But I really think that the God I believe in, to borrow something from Philip Yancey, there's nothing we can do that can make God love us more. There's nothing we can do to make God love us less. God will judge in the end, and we have to hope that things will turn out in a good way.
Let's give a hand to our panelists.